Hey, what's up everybody, Axel here. Today we're playing Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, and we are going to be doing the Challenge Organization 13 event. Now, one thing to note before we get started is that I will not be editing this, so this is going to be just one run through all the way through, and there might be a hiccup here and there, but you're going to have to trust me that the strategies work. So they might not succeed, but you got to trust that with the right numbers, it does work out. Now, with that being said, there are some general things we have to talk about before getting started. So the first one, make sure your sub slots are maxed. Any Keyblade that you plan on bringing into this event, just make sure you go to the equipment page, tap on the sub slots, and just hit optimize. The game will take care of it for you. With the banners right now, there are a lot of tier 8s, tier 9s, tier 10s being drawn. So this sub slot value is likely going to go up if you are able to do any of the 10 Mercy pulls. So something like Illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 Xion or Illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 Aqua. So make sure you go and update those subslots. The next thing you need to know is that buffs have a cap of plus 15 or minus 15. So the range is plus 15 to minus 15, or effectively 30. So this is important because a lot of enemies in this challenge will debuff you. They will give you minus 15 general strength. And remember, you always want to be at plus 15. So plus 15 general strength, plus 15 upright strength, plus 15 reverse strength, plus 15 magic, speed, power, strength. And you want the enemy to be at minus 15 general, upright, reverse, power, speed, magic, defense. So in those cases where the enemy debuffs you to minus 15 general strength, you're going to have to find a way to bring yourself back up to plus 15 general strength or plus 30. And this is very easily accomplishable with something like a Kingdom Hearts 3 Nominee with extra attack. Now, one of the next pieces of advice that I have is that if you draw a Nominee just randomly and you never had her before, you don't have one with extra attack, you literally get her in one of the Illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 banners, pretty much just plain as bread, then what you're going to do is go into the Moogle shop, buy Second Chance, give it to Nominee, and then go into the Moogle shop again, buy extra attack, because every single person is able to get one copy of extra attack, and give it to the Nominee. Again, this applies if you don't already have a Kingdom Hearts 3 Nominee with extra attack. If you're new, if you're returning and don't have this medal, if you're like a veteran and you have a bunch of medals, then likely you might not even need Kingdom Hearts 3 Nominee. But for most players, if you get one, again, just super plain from the Illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 banner, go into the Moogle shop, get Second Chance, get extra attack. It's going to help you immensely, covering all the buffs and debuffs that you could possibly need in this game. Now, one last thing to talk about before we get into the video, you have to understand how recovery buffing works. So I'm not going to go into great detail in this video. Definitely check out my video, just search Nexel recovery buffing, and it's going to explain how it works, why it's important, and there's 3 ways to activate recovery buffing. So you can decrease the enemy's counter and get hit with a powerful counterattack. You can activate just their regular counterattack. So if this enemy falls below 50% HP, it'll activate a counterattack and then you get knocked out. Or you can do reflection recovery buffing, where you crash straight into a reflection wall, eat some of the damage, but come back with more strength. So again, I'm not going to go extensively into how recovery buffing works. You're going to have to check out the video for that. Otherwise, this would be an even longer video than what I plan on making it. So let's go ahead straight into the event. So the first thing you need to know is that for the first 2 events, you can just pass it with Nominee. Nominee is enough. So for Larxene, big thing is make sure that you don't go in with speed medals, but that's okay because again, Nominee is enough. So let's go ahead into this event. And one Nominee, there's nothing else on this Nominee. She's in the wrong slot, so she's not getting the slot multiplier. She doesn't have attack boost max anything, but just one Nominee activation. Boom, that's enough. All right, first one down. Let's speed up this battle a little bit here. So don't use speed medals just because she will reflect speed metal damage to you, and that would just get kind of annoying, especially when you could just use one Nominee and be done with it. All right, next thing is going to be Marluxia. So Marluxia, you can't kill him with speed metal. So if we read Marluxia's description, he lowers your upright and reverse strength, casts sleep, counters when his count hits 0, and absorbs speed attacks. Reverse attacks aren't effective. So pretty much since he absorbs speed attacks, it just means you can't keep crashing into him with speed attacks and hope to win. So you have to come in with something else that's not speed. In this case, Nominee is enough again. So let's just go ahead, activate Nominee, and be done with it. And I'm sure, I haven't tested it personally, but I'm pretty sure Kingdom Hearts 3 Kyrie A is enough for defeating this enemy, or a lot of these enemies, at least the Larxene and Marluxia. Alright, so that is Marluxia. Now, with Luxord, you don't want to use magic metals because he has magic metal reflection, and there's a lot of easier ways to kill him, especially when he's only level 1500. So really all you need is one nominate and then one extra metal with good traits. He's still pretty weak. So even though he has magic metal reflection, he's still pretty weak. You just need one good buff and then one good attack. So this Lingering Will on my second slot here has ground, aerial, extra attack. It's got the full works in it. So we'll activate Nominate. And then again, it actually looks like Nominate is enough. But I did have Nominate in the Fenrir, which makes her super strong. But this is going to be a very easy one. Nominate with one extra metal that has like ground, aerial, extra attack. It could be just Nominate in the friend metal with good traits. And then you're good to go. Alright, moving on to Demyx. So Demyx, if we read his description, he boosts his defense, lowers your strength, counters when his count hits 0, and absorbs magic attacks. So because he absorbs magic attacks, it just means you can't go in with a full setup of magic and then hope to be able to take him out. Now, Demyx, there isn't really any tricks, but his defense is pretty high, so you're just going to want to make sure your medals have ground enemy defense minus 60%. I should have actually talked about this at the beginning of the video, but make sure your medals have more or less perfect traits, with your damaging medals having ground enemy defense minus 60%, aerial enemy defense minus 60%, and potentially extra attack 40%. So we go ahead and activate the Nominate. Again, it's very important to have Nominate with extra attack just because it takes care of the buffs and debuffs without having much thinking. So there isn't really a hardcore strategy that I have for Demyx. Really, it just ends up being a power contest, being able to overwhelm him with damage. So let's just do that. And you have 3 turns to do this. I don't believe there are any additional tricks like poison, paralysis, anything like that. So really, you just gotta muscle this one and take him out with medals that have that ground enemy defense minus 60%. Okay. So that takes care of Demyx. Now we start to move into the enemies that have kind of something particularly difficult about them, or at least they start to get kind of tricky, and this is where our bag of tricks starts to come out in terms of creative ways to defeat these. So the next one is going to be Axel. So let's go ahead and read his description. So Axel lowers your strength, counters when his count hits 0, so automatically with that counter hitting 0, we're kind of clued in that we can use recovery buffing here, and absorbs power attacks. So since he absorbs power attacks, it means we can't go in with a full setup of just power metals like this Fenrir right here, otherwise he's just going to absorb them, we're going to do no damage. So let's go ahead and switch over to our counterpoint, and let's use this setup here. So for Axel, since he does have a counter, it means you can decrease it and use recovery buffing. So let's go ahead and use this setup right here and just show you an example really quickly. So if we go into this fight, again, we're going to use our Nominate, and this is again where buffs start to become important because he starts with +9 general and +9 upright. We use one Nominate and he's still not at -15 general and not -15 upright. So Nominate with extra attack, boom, we're done right there. Alright, so now we can start just attacking him, and his defense is pretty high, so you're going to have to use quite a few damaging metals. Again, that ground enemy defense minus 60% is going to be pretty vital to passing this one. Now, let me go ahead and take a quick look at the rest of my metals. So we are going to want to use recovery buffing in order to make this easy. So since we have a counter of 8, pretty much it just means by the friend metal, we need to get it down to 0. So we could just tap along here, just keep tapping, and let's see. So you're going to have to do some math in order to make sure that the numbers work out. But I can activate this Kyrie, and then he's going to be at +3. You can manipulate counters with things like the Nova, so that's -1. You can manipulate them with other things like Supernova. So in that case, we can trigger this one here and bring it down to just 1. And then we can tap with this last metal, bring his counter down to 0, and then he uses his counter attack, knocks us out, we use recovery buffing, and come back even stronger than before. So you just keep rinsing and repeating this method, and you maintain all your buffs, making it super easy from turn to turn So we'll just keep attacking him here. And that's essentially what you're going to do. The main thing, make sure you have ground enemy defense minus 60%. Make sure you have a way of getting over his buffs with something like a Kingdom Hearts 3 nominee with extra attack. And then make sure you use recovery buffing, making sure that last attack is going to bring his counter down to 0, knocks you out, you use recovery buffing. Alright, on to the next one. So next we have Saix. And let's go ahead and read his description. So for Saix, he lowers your strength, counters when his HP falls below 50%, and deals heavy damage to the end after you get him below 50%. You'll receive 10% of the power-based damage you deal. So that 10% of power-based damage being reflected, that clues us in that we have recovery buffing to use. Now, we also see that he counters when his HP falls below 50%. So again, another opportunity for recovery buffing. So what this means to me when I think about this, it means that by the end of the second turn, we have to have decreased his HP below 50% in order to make the most use out of that recovery buffing. Now, there's another way to manipulate this recovery buffing, and it's by using a power medal on the final slot. So for example, let's go ahead and use this Kingdom Hearts 3 Illustrated Lee/Axel. So let's go into this fight. And the idea is you just use recovery buffing to continually stack your strength. So again, he starts off at plus 10 general and plus 10 reverse. Kingdom Hearts 3 nominee with extra attack completely takes care of that. And even though he does power metal reflection, nominee is so weak when she's not on the correct slot that it's just going to reflect 1 damage, and that's okay. So we can just go here. And again, ground enemy defense minus 60%, pretty vital for passing a lot of content. So let's just keep hitting him, and then in that final slot, we have the Lee/Axel, which is power, and that means that damage is going to get reflected back to us. So let's actually activate one of these just to prove how awesome recovery buffing is and how great it can make setup and make it easier to defeat content. All right, so let's just swipe along here. So we get to the Lee/Axel, and then we just reflect the damage. So boom, we get hit with the reflection, we come back, recovery buffing, good to go. Now we just have to make sure his HP falls below 50% on this second turn. So for example, let's go ahead and just activate this. And I think this should do it. I think this should drop it below 50%. Alright, so he counterattacks. But again, with a counterattack, we are now recovery buffing twice. So we got the first one off with the reflection, we got the second one off with the counterattack. Now let's go ahead and activate nominee, because again, those buffs keep coming back. So since they rebuff themselves and debuff you sometimes, you're going to want to make sure that nominee is there. But at this point, if you followed this strategy correctly, you're stronger on the third turn than you ever have been for the first or second turn, making it very easy to just punish the Saix right there. Because he essentially forces you to use recovery buffing with that counterattack at 50% HP. Now we move on to Zexion, who's one of the trickier ones, mainly because he uses resists. So let's go ahead and take a look at the enemy. So Zexion overwrites your strength, has an ability that poisons and paralyzes, counters at 0, and absorbs magic attacks. Reverse metals aren't very effective. Now when it comes to the attack that paralyzes you and poisons you, it's going to be the normal attack and the counter attack. So remember, counter attack, we're thinking maybe we can use recovery buffing for this enemy. But remember that counter attack poisons and paralyzes you. So one really big thing that's going to help with this quest is going to be paralysis resist 100%. Now I know a lot of people don't have this or poison resist 100%. So I believe I got to double check which one has poison resist 100%. Okay, it's going to be this Renova Aqua. So going into this fight with poison resist 100% and paralysis resist 100% is going to help immensely with consistency and making it very easy to take out this enemy. Now, a lot of people might not have poison resist 100% or paralysis resist 100%. Remember that you can always ask the people in your party if they can share something that has paralysis resist 100% or poison resist 100%. Another thing is that if you have 5 different metals that all have just 1 resist, those all stack. So for example, if I had like poison resist 20% right here, and then every single metal in my setup had one poison resist 20%. Those all stack, and that's poison resist 100%. Now keep in mind, you can probably get away with something like poison resist 80%, poison resist 60%. It's just super consistent to have 100% for both, and remember, you can always ask your party to see if they're willing to share one that has 100%. And it's going to make it super easy because at that point, we don't care about the poison, we don't care about the paralysis, and we can just use the recovery buffing when his counter hits 0. Now, his second attack is going to be a meteor attack that debuffs your general, upright, and reverse strength and rebuffs his upright and reverse defense. Again, one of those scenarios where having a Kingdom Hearts 3 nominee with extra attack is going to make it very easy to bounce back and make sure you have all the buffs and debuffs that you need to do maximum damage. Now, he has a 25 hit blue counter, and what that means is we're going to want to go in with a metal that decreases count. So, for example, let's take a look. We can use this. So, remember that the TVA metal does affect count, so we can just go in with this, and that's okay. He does absorb magic attacks, though, and that's another thing that I need to pay attention to, because that means we're going to want to use a different setup. So, let's go ahead with this setup here. And I actually think I messed up because this doesn't have poison resist 100%. It was the Aqua that gave me the poison resist 100%, but this nominee has poison resist 40%, so maybe that's going to be enough. So we'll double activate nominee because that gets rid of all the buffs and debuffs, and we don't have to worry about that anymore. All right, let's go ahead and activate this Ventus, which is going to decrease the count. So again, we're aiming for that final metal to give us the count all the way down to 0. So let's go ahead and activate some more metals. And there's a lot of different ways to manipulate count. You can use metal attacks, you can use supernova attacks, you can use just the regular nova attack. So let's keep decreasing this count. And I believe that the TVA at the end does have extra attack, so we should be able to just hit him some more here. So with extra attack, TVA is minus 14 to blue counters because it's it's minus 7 with just one attack, so it should be minus 14 with 2 attacks. Alright, so we did some damage. Let's go ahead and activate TVA. And then let's activate it one more time. And that is going to activate the counterattack and then give us recovery buffing. Now remember that this counterattack normally will poison and paralyze you, and that can throw a huge wrench into the problem because paralysis can make you skip metals, which is not good, and then poison will immediately knock you out if you don't have an Asuna left. So in this case, we did not get hit with the poison. The 40% from the nominee came through, and then we still have our Asuna from the pet skill. So let's go ahead and attack him some more. And again, we used recovery buffing, meaning that we are strong this turn. So let's go ahead and just keep activating it here. Let's actually speed up this fight to make it quicker for all of us here. Let's activate the Vanitas. And then double Ventus, bringing it down to 11. And let's just skip ahead straight into the TVA, just so that you can see the recovery buffing at work. Alright, so we get hit again. But again, recovery buffing, we came back. We have a lot of strength now. We're cracking more than 100,000 strength just from using recovery buffing, and from here it should be a cakewalk. So just to keep reiterating it, it's important to know ground enemy defense minus 60% is going to make a huge difference when it comes to knocking these enemies out. Alright, so pretty much this whole event is just recovery buffing galore, so make sure you understand how the concept works. Alright, so this next one is going to be a little different. So this Lexaeus fight is pretty much just a huge flex. So he strikes first, which means that he automatically takes out one of your revives. So normally you get HP recovery 1 and second chance. His first attack hits you so hard that he takes away your HP recovery, meaning you really only have 2 turns to take him out. And this is really just going to be the biggest flex you can possibly do by taking him out with just sheer damage. So let's go ahead into counterpoint. Now, one thing is that he reflects 10% of power damage. Again, this should be thinking of the idea, or it should make you start thinking that we can use recovery buffing in order to make this easier. And then he also counterattacks when his count hits 0. So again, recovery buffing, thinking about these counterattacks, reflections. How can we make it so that we get knocked out in the middle of our turn and start using recovery buffing? So in this case, what we can do is we can just make the final metal, our friend metal, a power metal. And that's essentially just going to re-proc, or it's going to proc that 10% reflection of power damage, knock us out, come back with recovery buffing, and then we keep hitting him some more. So let's go ahead and go into this fight here. So one thing to note that with recovery buffing, you want to make sure you time your supernovas correctly. So in this case, since we're using recovery buffing all the way through, we just activate all of our supernovas right out of the door. So we got knocked out. Our HP recovery is gone. He's got a 3-hit counter. So red counters go down by 1 with every single metal that affects count. So we can either use recovery buffing with the counter, or we can use it with the power reflection, which is what we're going to do. So let's go ahead and activate the Nominate. This is going to get the count up. And again, we don't have to hold back really with our supernova attacks, because we are just going to be using recovery buffing for the entirety of this mission. So let's go ahead and keep activating these. Reactivate this. And I don't want to get his HP too low. I really want to show you the recovery buffing in action. So let's actually stop here and then just attack him normally. So you're going to want to pay attention to the counters, because that can affect when your recovery buffing goes off. So in this case, he's at 8. I don't plan on bringing him down with just tap attacks or using my Nova. So let's just go ahead and just do our regular attacks, because we know our final metal is going to be a metal that we use for recovery buffing by reflection. Now, one big thing to note is that when you use the reflection for the recovery buffing, he maintains his count. So whatever count he's at when we use the recovery buffing, it stays there. So for example, if we just hit him right now with the Lee/Axel, we eat the reflection, but his count stays at wherever it was beforehand. So it might be better for you to use recovery buffing with the counter. It might be better for you to use recovery buffing with the friend metal being a power metal. You really have to see what your strategy is, but you can activate all your supernova attacks as long as you time it right. So see how we have 117,000 strength starting this last turn? That should be enough to take him out. Again, watch the counters and see if it's going to be the counters or the power reflection that's going to be your means for recovery buffing. But this is pretty much a huge flex. You really just got to outdo him in terms of strength. Alright, moving down to the final 4, we start off with Vexen, who is going to be kind of a defensive tank. So let's go ahead and head into the fight. And one thing that I didn't really talk about is that you can use the Kingdom Hearts 3 XIII, the one that you can get from the beginner deal, and overwrite the enemy's buffs. I didn't really use it in this example because it's much better to have Kingdom Hearts 3 Nominate with extra attack, because it's more consistent. You get it turn after turn. You don't have to worry about if they debuff you or rebuff themselves in the middle of the turn. So Kingdom Hearts 3 Nominate with extra attack is going to be better than Kingdom Hearts 3 XIII, but you can still use Kingdom Hearts 3 XIII's Overwrite Supernova to get those buffs rolling. Alright, so for Vexen, he boosts his defense, he overwrites your strength, reflects 10% of magic damage, and counterattacks when his count hits 0. So again, we are looking at 10% magic damage reflection, recovery buffing. Counterattacks when his count hits 0. Again, thinking about recovery buffing. So in this case, let's go ahead and switch over to a speed setup. But since we might be using that 10% magic reflection for recovery buffing, let's go ahead and borrow a magic metal. So for example, Illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 Xion. So let's go into this fight here. Now he does have 2 general attacks. The first one is going to be an Icicle Spike that regenerates his general defense, bringing his defense back up. And again, this is why it's important to pay attention to buffs, because when he does that general spike attack, you're going to want to make sure his debuff goes back down to -15. So as we can see, when we start this fight, he reflects magic damage. He has +14, pretty much perfect defense across the board. It's just 1 short of perfect defense. And then he has a 20-hit blue counter. So we have 2 means of recovery buffing: the magic metal reflection and the blue hit counter. So in this case, let's go ahead and just stick with the magic metal reflection. Why not? Again, you have 2 avenues to do this. So let's do that. Let's do that. Again, the Nominate takes care of all the buffs and debuffs, because even though he was at +14, the Nominate, 1 activation is -15, so he's at -1, and then -15 from the extra attack is going to bring him down to -15. We don't have to worry about the rest of it. All right, so let's go ahead and keep attacking him here. And remember, if you use the magic metal reflection for your recovery buffing, just make sure you pay attention to the count because that stays the same. So let's go ahead and activate the first attack here. Just dealing out some damage, dealing some more damage, even more damage. So this is why it's important to make sure those traits are set and that those subslots are set and your Keyblades are level 35 if possible, because in the end you have to do damage. You have to be able to hurt him. Alright, we eat the magic metal reflection, we come back, he still has his 8-hit counter, but we're back at Naminé, who's going to give us all the buffs that we need. So if you do recovery buffing with the reflection, you don't have to worry about his icicle attack regenerating his defense, and his second attack is actually an iceberg attack that decreases your general strength by 14. But again, with Naminé, doesn't matter. I recommend using the magic reflection recovery buffing just because you don't have to worry about his special attacks and what they do for your general strength or his general defense. So let's keep attacking here. And even if we do get his counter down to 0, again, we have Kingdom Hearts 3 Naminé with extra attack, and that's going to take care of our buffs and debuffs. So let's get him down to 0 just as an example. Alright, counterattack goes off. We're at minus 14 general strength if you see it right there. So Naminé, 2 activations, brings us from minus 14 all the way up to plus 15. Good to go. Not a problem. Now, since we already activated his attack twice, since we've been knocked out twice already, we're going to want to make sure we definitely get him this turn. So let's make sure all our supernovas are activated. And this is, I'm sorry, this is another thing I should have addressed, but you got to make sure you know how to activate your supernovas, when to activate them. Every single turn, you should at least have one supernova going off, just so you get that additional 320% special attack bonus. Alright, so again, 2 avenues for recovery buffing. If you use the magic metal reflection, you don't need to worry about his special attacks, but if you use the counter method, then remember that his icicle attack is going to, or I'm sorry, the icicle spike attack increases his general defense, and then the iceberg attack decreases your general strength. Alright, moving on to Xaldin. So, quite an interesting fight here. So, Xaldin resets your boost, lowers the strength of all attributes, counters when his HP drops below 30%. So again, we see the word counter, we immediately think of recovery buffing, and absorbs speed attacks. So don't use speed attacks because you can hit him forever with speed attacks and it's not going to take him out. Upright metals aren't very effective. That really doesn't mean much. Whenever it says this type of metal isn't very effective, it means that the enemy likely starts with some buffs that, or some defense buffs that are against that attribute. So likely he's got an upright defensive debuff just to start off. Doesn't really matter though because we've got that Naminé. Alright, so let's go ahead and why not just use this? Or let's see. Let's see if our Fenrir has what it takes. Okay, why not? We can use this setup for Fenrir. So, going into Xaldin, there's a few things we need to know. Number 1, he has, or I'm sorry, let's just go over his attacks. So he has 2 different attacks. So there's a Wind Dragon attack where he summons his spears, creates that nice little Wind Dragon from Kingdom Hearts 2, and that's going to give you a minus 15 power and magic strength. So that's the lowers the strength of all attributes thing, but again, with Naminé, we're not concerned. We just heal that off right away. Now he has another attack, which I like to just call Spears Falling from the Sky because I have no idea what a better name is for it, and that resets your buffs. So let's go ahead into the fight here. And really, we're going to want to use recovery buffing as much as possible. But let's go ahead into the fight. So, once we get into this Xaldin fight, we notice that he doesn't have a counter. So, we can't use recovery buffing with counters. So, what that means is that by the end of the second turn, you're going to want to hit that 30% HP, and then he's going to counterattack you and forces you into recovery buffing. So, whatever you do, by the end of that second turn, make sure you get his HP to less than 30%, even if that means proccing all of your supernovas. So like I said earlier, every single turn, you're going to want to proc 1 supernova attack. So in this case, let's proc the Terranord Beam, because we want that 320% special attack bonus damage going off. So in that case, let's go ahead here. Again, just cranking out as much damage as possible. Ground enemy defense minus 60% being very important for passing these very high level quests. Alright, so let's just keep doing damage to him. And since we're going to be using recovery buffing, that's why it's like that second turn, you're going to want to get him to that 30% HP. Alright, so we actually did get debuffed there. So he reset all the buffs with that Spears Falling from the Sky attack. But with Naminé, we don't really care. Again, we get that all back immediately. And this is where Naminé might be better than Kingdom Hearts 3 Kyrie A, because you only get Kingdom Hearts 3 Kyrie A's Supernova attack once. Now, since this is the second turn, we're going to want to go all out, because we know that we're going to be using recovery buffing by the end of this, because he counterattacks us, and the counterattack should signify that we are going to get recovery buffing going off. Alright, and then let's go ahead and activate this. And activate that. And again, we're aiming to get him below 30% HP because he's going to counterattack us. And in that case, we've got recovery buffing going off, and we're just immensely Super Saiyan-esque strong. Alright, so let's get his HP down. So he's going to counterattack us with that Wind Dragon attack, which again decreases our power and our magic strength. But with Naminé, we don't really care because we just get it all back. So this is why the Naminé ends up being so important for this quest, especially if you just ran into her randomly as you were pulling for an illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 medal. So now we come back, we're super strong, and then we should be able to take him out with our new strength stat. Alright, so that's how we're going to take care of Xaldin. Let's move on to Xigbar, who is one of the few enemies in this entire game who uses an interrupt attack. So let's go ahead and wait for the game to load. So if we go into the Xigbar fight, so reading the description here, he lowers your strength, counters after your slot 4 attack, and reflects 10% of speed-based damage. So we see that reflects 10% of speed-based damage, immediately thinking of recovery buffing. So our last slot should be a speed medal in order to take advantage of recovery buffing. He lowers your strength and counters after slot 4. These are actually tied together. So the attack he does after your slot 4 will decrease your strength by 15. So this is slot 4. What that means for us is that we want to make sure that this medal here has some means of giving us plus 15 general strength. In this case, we have Lingering Will. He's copying the Cloud, and the Cloud special attack does have general strength plus 15, so we're good. But just make sure this 5th slot has something to re-increase your general strength back up to 15, or you have Supernova attacks that give you plus 15 general strength that you activate after he debuffs you. Alright, so let's go ahead and head into the fight. Again, we want to borrow a speed medal, so let's go ahead and borrow this TVA. Alright, so if we go into this fight here, again, we see that he starts off with plus 15 upright and plus 15 reverse defense, but with Naminé, we don't really care because we just get rid of it. So see, now he's at 0 reverse defense and 0 upright defense, but with a Naminé, extra attack, he's at minus 15, everything, no questions asked, which is good. Alright, since we're going to be using recovery buffing the entire way through, we're going to want to make sure we activate all of our Supernovas. There's no point in holding back Supernovas if you know you're going to be using recovery buffing for the entire fight. So we'll go here. Let's activate. Oh, I actually made a mistake there. I made a mistake there because we reflected that. So let's go ahead and head out and head back in. So we used a speed supernova, which ended up just biting us at the end. So let's go ahead and head back in there, and we'll redo it. So everything stays the same, the concept stays the same. Just make sure you know the supernova attributes so that you don't make mistakes like I did and activate the speed one and get knocked out. Alright, so let's go ahead and activate all these. Again, since we know we're using recovery buffing all the way through, there's no point in holding back any of these. And I believe Xigbar is where the event starts to become pretty difficult. So you're going to want to make sure you have the best possible setups that you have, even if it's not power. I think the first time I defeated this enemy, I used counterpoint. Alright, so let's go ahead and just do damage. We activated all the supernovas that we could. Now, this is going to be our 4th slot medal, this Terranord B. So after we activate this, as you can see, we lost all of our general strength. It no longer shows up in our buffs. So with extra attack, we're going to get hit twice with that attack. So this could be important because it could potentially knock you out if your HP isn't high enough or if you don't have a high enough defense stat. This attack really isn't meant to knock you out, but it could, so just keep that in mind. But since we have this cloud here and this lingering will, remember that lingering will copies the cloud, and cloud gives us plus 15 general strength. So we are back up and we are doing damage. So this, and again, we're using recovery buffing all the way through. So, since we know that this is a speed metal and he reflects speed damage, we can activate this. We come back. Okay, so we have recovery buffing, and then boom, we just keep going with it. So, since we activated the Supernova Renew, let's go ahead and activate all these. Again, there's no point in holding back if you know you're going to be using recovery buffing all the way through. And then let's just do more damage. And then I do want to show you the importance of the speed reflection. So let's go ahead and go here, go here, go here, and then we will attack with this. Alright, so we just eat speed damage right here, come back for the third turn. We have more than 100,000 strength, and then we proceed to take him out. And that's going to be Xigbar. So Xigbar is just recovery buffing all the way through. Alright, let's move on to the final boss. Sorry, one thing to note with Xigbar is that if he uses his regular attack on you, that it's that desperation teleportation attack where he's like zooming all over the place and shooting you, it will give you minus 15 general, upright, and reverse strength, but with Nominate it doesn't matter. You're going to want to use recovery buffing to make that fight super easy. Alright, so with Xemnas, he overwrites your strength, he paralyzes you, and counters when his count hits 0. Attacks aren't very effective. So attacks aren't very effective, he likely starts off with some type of defensive buff. So there are 2 attacks with Xemnas. The first one is a 2-hit attack that paralyzes you. So we're thinking paralysis, we're thinking paralysis resist 100% is going to be very useful in this quest. Because he counts, or he has a counter when his count hits 0. So we're thinking recovery buffing. But one thing to note is that his first attack and his counter attack are the same, meaning that his counter attack will also paralyze you. So that paralysis resist 100% is going to make this fight immensely easier. Again, ask your party if they can share a medal with paralysis resist 100% if you're having a hard time and struggling with that paralysis. Alright, so let's go ahead and use his counters in order to give us recovery buffing. So let's see, we're going to want to go in with a setup that somewhat decreases count. Oh, look, we have these Ventuses that do decrease count. So let's go ahead with this, and let's borrow the TVA, and that's going to give us the count decrease that we need. Alright, so as we can see, he starts off with perfect buffs, like straight up perfect buffs. So he's got upright, reverse, power, speed, magic, general defense, plus 15, which is literally perfect. But in the eyes of perfection, here comes Nominate to strip away all of that and make this not a problem at all. So literally 1 medal, 2 casts, perfect defense down. Excellent. Alright, so let's go ahead and decrease his count some more because we know that we're going to be using recovery buffing. Now, similarly to the past strategy, since we know we're using recovery buffing, there's no reason for us to hold back on activating our supernovas, because we're just going to maintain all of the strength that we obtained from them throughout the entire fight. So let's just activate all of them. Again, there's no reason to hold back here. Now, one thing to note is that if you rely on using the supernova attacks to decrease the count, you might have to be a little tricky about it. Let's see, we don't want to decrease his HP all the way down to 0. We do want to show how this works. Alright, so he's at 27. I believe with the Ventuses and the TVA, we do have enough to take him down to minus 0. I guess it's the same, right? 0, minus 0, it's all the same. Alright. So let's go ahead and, just for purposes of demonstrating this, let's go ahead and activate our TVA, making sure we show the recovery buffing going off. Alright, so he uses his counterattack. Remember that this counterattack normally paralyzes you. So recovery buffing is harder with this particular enemy because if you don't have paralysis resist 100%, you're going to be paralyzed, you might be skipping medals. So in that case, it makes it a lot harder. But since we have paralysis resist 100% on our nominee, we're good to go. And from here on out, it just ends up being a slugfest because you're going to use recovery buffing and you're just going to become stronger and stronger. So let's just keep attacking him. And then our TVA is going to give that count and bring it down to 0. And then let's actually, I want to illustrate this working. So let's hope this doesn't knock him out. Okay, well it did. But essentially it's just recovery buffing all the way through. Really having that paralysis resist 100% is going to make that fight immensely easier. Alright, so that is the Organization 13 event. Again, big take-home points. Make sure your sub-slots are updated. Kingdom Hearts 3 nominee with extra attack and second chance going to be a lifesaver. If you get Kingdom Hearts 3 nominee from your general pulls, you can just buy second chance in the Moogle shop, and then you could buy 1 copy of extra attack and just give it to the nominee, and that takes care of all the buffs and debuffs that we ran into. So let's see, we talked about the sub-slots, we talked about recovery buffing. Make sure you know how to use recovery buffing. It is going to be essential for how these strategies work, and it's the best way to cheese this enemy. Alright, well with that being said, that is the end of this full clear guide. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to leave them down in the comments below, and I'd be happy to answer when I have the time. If you'd like to join my Discord, get some additional help, or ask questions about the strategies, go ahead and join. It's right below the screen. Type that into your URL and you should be good to go. But that's all for now. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, until next time, take it easy.